welcome back to the Muse Memorandum. I'm your host, JJ, and today we are on episode 2 of season 2 of the Conversation series. I have another great guest with me today, Emerson Dameron. He is joining us from Venice Beach, California, and Emerson is a podcaster, writer, producer, performance artist, comedian.
So I don't know. I'll let the critics decide.
LA's #1 avant-garde motivational speaker. He has a weekly show on K-Chung Radio and does live performances and podcasts that I'm sure he's going to tell us all about. But first, before we get started, I just want to say a special thank you to you, Emerson, for referring so many wonderful, talented, and creative people to the Muse Memorandum for me. So thanks so much for that.
You're
I'm
most
very
welcome.
Grateful.
My network is my net worth. So I'm always working those connections.
Well, it's been wonderful to have great people coming on, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's an interesting crew for sure.
I like
this
That's
world that you're building around this. It's super cool.
Thank you so much. Well, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on with me. And how you doing today?
How am I showing up today? What is my aura like? It's an age of discontinuity. All bets are off, and none of us are ready for what's already happened. But I feel pretty good. It's nice when people take an interest in me and my work and my life. It makes me feel like I exist, which on most of the time is debatable.
I feel you. It's very surreal, the world that we're in now. So I'm with you there.
The weirdest thing that could happen is if things got boring again, like the 90s.
That would suck. For things to get boring. I actually really liked the 90s, but
there were good and bad elements of it.
Yeah, with everything. It's true.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell us a bit about your background and just a little bit of a bio history of Emerson Dameron?
Sure. I think of myself as a writer first and last. I'm a medical copywriter professionally, which is interesting. I've been fascinated with medical equipment for much of my life. My mom was a physical therapist, and I remember after school sometimes I would go and hang out in the hospital while I was waiting for her to get off of work, which is probably completely unsafe, but it gave me kind of just a fascination with that whole world and the implements they use. So, it's a fun way to make money. I think what I really consider myself meant to do, if anything, like if it turns out that we were all put here for some reason, I think mine would be making fun of things, but more specifically taking unpleasant experiences and turning them into art, for lack of a better word, that makes people laugh, or makes me laugh at least. I try to, at least if I can cross the threshold where I think it's funny, then I can clock out for the day. If other people think it's funny, I enjoy that too. And, I'm always trying to make it funny for them. But I grew up way out in the woods. I'm from Western North Carolina, a town called Nebo, which is a little bit outside of Asheville. It's near Marion, which now has kind of embraced its identity as an Asheville exurb. Asheville, for anyone who doesn't know, is kind of a new age mecca. I grew up in the 90s outside of there at the time when it was nominated as Rolling Stone magazine's freakiest city in America.
So that's great.
There was kind of a West Coast vibe, but with a little bit of like the Southern lack of pretentiousness. So I developed an interest in self-help and like the new age occult type stuff. I think as a result of being near Asheville, and also because my mom brought a bunch of self-help books home when her life was in chaos. And I read a lot of them and just developed. I think self-help is the most interesting or under-researched form of American literature. I think there's just, it tells you something about the American identity that you can't get anywhere else. And it's something I've always had a love-hate relationship with. I tend toward I mean, I think if your choices are, am I going to be a victim or am I going to be empowered? I would go with empowered 8 days a week. But, the problem is sometimes things happen that are not your fault. And
Right.
you don't want to get stuck with a philosophy that blames you for everything. Because there are some things that's just not going to cover. Um, anyway, I think part of the interest was it wasn't just anthropological. I've also had severe chronic depression my whole life, at least since I was kind of a morbid kid, and I remember it started to hit me the first day of kindergarten because my mom took me into kindergarten and dropped me off, and I felt like I parachuted into enemy territory. Like I was utterly confused. I didn't understand what was going on. I didn't, I couldn't, I didn't feel like I could connect with the people around me, and I felt betrayed by being abandoned here. And I remember asking one of the grown-ups because at that point I thought grown-ups will have answers for everything. Uh, when I want to go home, I don't like this. When can I go home? How can you make that happen? Let's make a deal. And they said, well, you can go home at the end of the day. I said, great. They said, but you have to come back the next day. I said, okay. How about after that? Well, you have to come back every day until Friday, and then you get 2 days off, and then you have to come back again next week, and that's pretty much the rest of your life. So I, I remember um, I was kind of a squeamish kid. There was just a sense of ambient terror, I remember, that I didn't really understand, that maybe is just baked into my DNA somehow. And part of how I dealt with that was by overcompensating and really diving into anything risky or taboo. Uh, was I My fascinations were sex, drugs, and death, and I got really good at researching kind of things on the fringe of human experience because I felt like my life in Nebo, North Carolina was so quotidian that what gave me hope was that things could be very weird somewhere else. Not necessarily good, but at least unpredictable. I went to college for journalism. I would have done literature, but because even then I was writing a lot. That was how I've always made sense of the world, and one thing I would do whether I got paid for it or not. But I wanted to do something practical that I could make a living at, which journalism is not a good choice for that. Uh, it wasn't then, and it really isn't now. But college was a great experience and formative in a number of ways. I went to University of Georgia in Athens, which has a fantastic library. Like it is, people have no idea some of the stuff that's in the library. Like I read occult literature and anarchist philosophy and like um a lot of stuff that I think would have caused a problem for them had anyone cared about literature. Like and actually known what was in there. Um I read Bataille and Nietzsche and a lot of stuff like that, which didn't do anything to make me more employable, but I think it fueled my urge to interrogate my experience and make fun of things that seemed ripe for mockery that I felt like were too widely accepted. Uh, I also had a radio show on the campus radio station. Radio was the first, I guess, creative medium that I ever really got into. I started doing radio when I was 16 years old. I
Wow.
did overnight shift from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. on a public radio station called WNCW, and absolutely loved it. Like I felt like a minor deity having that kind of power when I was a 16-year-old that was basically nobody noticed in my high school milieu. And over time, I started working in sketches that I wrote and doing. I had little running jokes. Probably my number one artistic inspiration is a guy named Joe Frank, who is deceased as of 2018, but had a syndicated radio show on. I think it was out of KCRW in LA for a long time, but it was for a while. It was also syndicated by this station, and it was a thing about radio that's hard to recreate now is you could make things that were designed to be stumbled into, where like people you don't have to seek it out. You don't need SEO or a marketing strategy. It's just people are spinning the radio dial, and a certain number of them are going to land on your show because there are only so many channels. And landing on Joe Frank's show is just one of my first big, like, mind-blowing what the fuck is this, like, before and after experiences with art. He did radio plays and monologues that were very noirish, very dark, and got into a lot of adult themes, but like with a really dry and cutting sense of humor. And I think hearing those shows was the first time I said, okay, that's what I want to do. Like that exactly. And I came around, I think very slowly. I did radio in college, which at the time, Athens was a great place to be. It was when Elephant Six and Neutral Milk Hotel and some of those folks were active. And it was the kind of place where it was very close together. At the time, it was very cheap. So, people didn't have to work 80 hours a week to make a living.
What year? What time frame is this?
I'm at risk of dating myself, but
Oh.
1998 through
well, I went in 1991, so
I was 7 years old when I got accepted to college, so that was cool. It was it's when I thought that, like, not, I felt like it closed the gap between, what I thought were legitimate artists like rock stars and just people I knew and myself. And it left me thinking that, like, not only am I allowed to make art, but I have an obligation to. I think that this life is all we get, or I think it's safe to assume that, like, I'm not sure how things work outside of that container, but I don't think that there's any reward for diminishing yourself. I don't think the meek inherit anything, and I think if you want to make art, you should go ahead and do it. And I think being surrounded by people that were really creative and doing interesting stuff that was making a national impression, but also are just very cool people that you could hang out and drink with, gave me a sense that, like, I didn't have to apologize for making stuff and putting it out there, or I didn't have to, like, get Capitol Records to sign off on it. I could just do something and put it out. I think when I got back into radio, it felt like coming home. For a long time, I'd felt like I wouldn't say it's a totally dead medium, but like there was talk a couple of years ago of getting rid of AM because I guess it was interfering with self-driving cars. Like there was some problem with the AM.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I guess the AM band and the Teslas were having some kind of an argument, and if people said, well, the purpose of the AM band is for like news about disasters. And I guess with the only, and what's, that was maybe 20 years ago, but now there's no such thing as local media anymore. I got a show with a microwatt station out of Chinatown in LA called K-Chung, which it was started by artists. It's kind of a liminal station. Like everyone there is a station manager. If you sign on as a volunteer in any capacity, you have you can have the title of station manager. I do a show that originally I got just because I wanted a place to work out ideas. And not only did I not care if anyone listened to it, that was a bonus. Because that way I could do whatever I wanted and not have to care if anyone was listening or what they thought about it. Uh, I only expected to do it for a while. It was just kind of it was an experiment that I was running, and then COVID happened, and concurrently with COVID, my marriage fell apart like disastrously. Within, I think, yeah, like a week before the shutdown, my domestic life just absolutely went up in flames. And I remember for a while, K-Chung went down because, at the time we were broadcasting from the studio and you couldn't do that. But in the early days of COVID, it seemed like a lot of people were coming up with ways to keep things going. And some of the kids from K-Chung got back on the air and came up with a plan for all of us to broadcast remotely and worked out collaborations with like Lumpen in Chicago. I think they had a partnership with. And I remember, and so I started doing the show again. And I remember doing one episode where it was at the worst, like the moment of reckoning in my marriage, like the should I stay or should I go moment. And I was living in Hollywood at the time, and I was out walking around on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, which was mostly boarded up and deserted. So it was very eerie. Like Venice Beach is basically a big amusement park. So I've lived in amusement parks for the last like 4 years of my life.
That's
but
fantastic. I love it.
Living in one during COVID was exquisite. And I just started talking into, like, I turned on my voice notes app and just started talking. Not about anything necessarily, just rambling. It's also relevant that I just switched antidepressant medications. And the one I was on, one of the things that they warn you about is it has an effect on impulse control. So they say, like, don't go to Vegas when you just started taking this stuff. And I started just ranting and rambling from the perspective of kind of a life coach type character. Like I mentioned, I've always had a fascination with Tony Robbins and motivational speakers. And I basically started speaking in the voice of like an emotionally unstable life coach. Like if I had to become a life coach and I had to express like pure confidence and be unfiltered about it. What are some outrageous things that I would say? And I just kept going and going, and I felt it was really cathartic. Like it was one of those things where I took improv classes when I was in Chicago, and I think that was one of the best things I ever did for myself. Like if any sort of social acuity that I have now is mostly because of that. So I'm able to just riff and improvise when things are good, and things were really good that day. And I just took all of those monologues and very lightly edited them together, and I used that as my K-Chung show, and it felt really good. Like it felt like I had thrown out some line of communication in the depths of I had never felt that isolated. I think at the time it felt like, maybe this was just how things were going to be. Like there was nobody was willing to guess when COVID would not be an
Right.
issue
Right.
anymore, which it still is, but we're pretending that it's not. So, but at the time, I didn't know how long we were going to be atomized like this. And I think that was because you could hear the life coach kind of breaking down and disintegrating into delusion over the course of the episode. That's when the way I felt about that and the way that a couple of people I know responded to it. I had a couple of friends at the time who I'd reconnected with during COVID because people were reconnecting with people
Yeah.
long distance. And there were a couple of them who really encouraged me to lean into the weirdness. And I doubled down on all the stuff that I enjoyed doing that I was afraid no one else would like. And that's how I started to take the show seriously. And I think it's been, I don't think that art is a good substitute for therapy. I think if you think that it is, you should probably try actual therapy if you can get it. Although I know it's just for rich people. But I think art can be therapeutic. And that show has been really therapeutic for me. Just because it's a way I can do anything I want. I've been a frustrated screenwriter, so it's fun to have a show that is required to greenlight any idea that I have. And it's just a way to transmute my own frustrations with myself, with the world, into but I spent a lot of time alone when I was a kid, and I developed a rich inner world. And I then fled 2,000 miles to the other side of the country, and I still have a rich inner world. And having a way to put that out there is makes me feel less alone, even if no one else listens. I would gladly keep doing this for years, even if there was no interest, just because it's that gratifying. So that's how I ended up doing LA's #1 avant-garde personal development program, Emerson Dameron's Medicated Minutes, which is actually once a month. It's the radio shows. The radio show is the first Wednesday of every month on K-Chung, and then it goes to a podcast. And but I put other stuff on the podcast feed, so I'm always making stuff. I also make weird satirical videos that I've had a lot of fun with, but I think the thing that I'd like to do sooner than later with those is start collaborating with some folks, because I use it's monologues and jokes that I've written with stock footage and often stock music. I've worked with a couple of musicians, and that's been really gratifying. But and I've convinced myself that the janky stock footage is very arch and postmodern. But I think it's time to find like visual artists to collaborate with. I think that would make those more interesting. But they keep me busy. I'm always making stuff because that makes everything else about life marginally tolerable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it directs the focus to something creative.
Yeah, and I think it is like there's a sort of alchemy to it, where if you can take something that is I do believe life is suffering. I think without pain there's no pleasure. I think we get both in roughly equal measure, but one power that you have is taking that and creating something with it. And I think I've definitely felt like I plugged into something bigger than me sometimes, or even if it's just complete intellectual masturbation. It's great to have the freedom to do that.
Yeah.
I have a vasectomy, divorced. I'm grateful for the freedom that my Jeff Lebowski lifestyle affords me to just pour my heart into doing Nietzsche jokes that nobody understands on a radio show. It makes the bad times more survivable. That's always an open question. It's the great philosophical debate.
I can appreciate that for sure. And the alchemy of things, I've had this similar experience with art and the metalsmithing and all that, and just taking all the anguish and all of the rough times and just transmuting it through creating something new. I think it's important.
Do you ever have the experience of where you remember you started to make something and you kind of had an idea of what was going to happen, but then you spaced out and then later on the thing was there and you're like,
yeah.
I don't remember making that, but that's pretty cool. Whoever made that must have some spark plugs.
Yeah, I've had that with the collage work that I've done and some of the artwork, but mostly with the collage work where I have all the people. It's mostly like magazine paper that I cut out,
right?
And yeah, I've got this idea and I'm starting, and then it's like I just go somewhere else, and I'm doing the stuff. I'm sort of paying attention, but I'm somewhere else, and then after a while, I'm like, oh, something just sort of develops. It materializes on the paper or the board or whatever I'm working on. So yeah.
I think what the danger of that is you could end up chasing that dragon. Where when I get one of those moments, a lot of times I will just try to recreate to the exact detail the circumstances that were present when that happened, but it doesn't work. It's not a force that can be summoned. You have to show up and do the work when you don't want to. The only time it matters is when you don't want to, and that's the only way you're going to be there when that lightning strikes. But that's how I and other artists that I've known have developed serious substance abuse problems, because we've been shit-faced and the lightning has struck, and it's been like, oh, that must have been because I was drunk.
That's
now I have right. If I can get drunk every night, then I will be, that genius will happen again, because that's why it happened. And it ends up having quite the opposite effect. And I think that's what happens when you think that you can control that.
Right. Yeah. I haven't really done that much myself, but I know some really good artist friends that have definitely, it's the muse, and it hits them when they're under the influence of something, and so they're like, oh, well, I only get these great ideas when I get totally drunk. But then they end up an alcoholic. So yeah, it's
I will say you're missing out. If you haven't almost drank yourself to death, you don't have the kind of amazing stories that I have. One of the things I think, but I'm somewhat skeptical of AA. I don't talk about it much because I know a lot of people who I love who say that it saved their lives, and I God knows I would never take that away from them. But to me, I think what's great about it is the community, and one of the things that's great about the community is the Hollywood AA meetings are basically open mics. It's just the gnarliest motherfuckers you've ever seen that come in and try to outdo each other with all the horrifying things that they did when they were on meth. So if you completely destroy your life and almost kill yourself and show up in the hospital with one of the EMTs referred to as third world problems, which happened to me in 2014 back in
Goodness.
Chicago. It's totally worth it because you get to go to AA meetings, and those are funny sometimes. So what I'm saying is, like, don't, if you want to start abusing substances, don't let anybody stop you. They're just trying to stop you from being cool.
Okay. That's definitely an interesting take on it, but I appreciate it.
Yeah,
and I'm skeptical too. I'm skeptical, but that's another story for another day.
Yeah, I think the problem is, like, skepticism is a hard stance to maintain on an ongoing basis.
It is.
Like, if you're skeptical of everything, you'll go barking mad.
Right.
And, I think a lot of people I know who are very skeptical of experts and captains of industry, and a lot of people that I think the modal person should be more skeptical of, are not the least bit skeptical of, like, the most obvious grifters that they can find. Like, I think big pharma, you should be skeptical of big pharma.
Absolutely.
But you should not then go and decide that Alex Jones is the fount of truth. That's where, but then, being consistently skeptical is fucking hard. Yeah. It's exhausting. And I can understand how, it wears people out, and it fries out your connection with reality to be questioning things all the time, which is why I think art or rock climbing or anything that kind of gets you back to the earth is a good way to deal with the friction of that.
Yeah, I agree. The connection with nature and just anything creative, and even if you're an introvert or have social anxiety, just connecting with other people instead of being behind the screen all the time is a good thing.
Yeah, I moved over here when my marriage ended. I decided I wanted to make a fresh start, and the LA is enormous. It's like a golf course. It's very spread out. And the 405 freeway is kind of a line of demarcation. Oof. Where people on one side go to the other side maybe a couple of times a year, and only if they really have to. So when I moved from Hollywood to Venice, I wanted to just completely start over, and I succeeded beyond my hopes. I found that fantastic. It was. Yeah, I found that it was challenging to maintain friendships because, those people are right over there, but yet, you're not going to see much of them most of the time. And I would say for the last couple of years, I had a really confusing breakup about a year ago that kind of, I had to check out for a while to deal with that, because I felt just weirdly contaminated. Like I didn't want to be around people because, I felt like there was something wrong with me and I was going to infect them with that. Right. And that's when I started really pouring myself into making videos and podcasts, because that was something I could do myself for myself.
Right. And you have that level of control so that you don't have to, it's like the slow release valve of allowing the actual contact with another person. You're controlling how much contact you actually have.
Yeah. Safe. And right. And when you felt like you really, were just unable to kind of connect with someone or people in general, which is something that happens a lot after divorce and pandemics, where everyone is shut down for a year.
Right.
I went into a bit of a retreat. I think at this point it feels important to slowly start doing things again. Like I used to do live storytelling shows around. I did stand-up comedy a long time ago. And like after I got sick, I couldn't go out and do open mics until 2 in the morning anymore. So I started doing storytelling to kind of split the difference, where you can be a little bit more expansive. You don't have to get those laughs every 5 seconds.
Yeah, that's
So
a lot of
not everything.
pressure.
Yeah, and so it's almost easier to be funny if you don't have to be, I think, for most people.
Yeah.
And that was something I was very into from like 2018, 2019, the pre-COVID days, that I don't know if I'll ever like get back into it as much as I was before, because I really do like making the podcast and videos. I feel like I'm invested in that in a different kind of way. But I I'm looking for a community now. I felt like uh, I'm dancing in the corner by myself with a lot of this stuff, and it feels good to expose it to Earth's atmosphere. And I think it makes the work better, and it being alone as much as I can be sometimes is not great for my tenuous grasp on sanity.
I agree. Yeah. I actually don't go out too much here either. I was living in New York for a long time, and then I moved up to Massachusetts just before COVID. And that was way out in the Atlantic on Cape Cod,
Yeah.
like almost on the tip. So I was very isolated during that time, because it's a tourist area and no one was coming because of COVID. So it was a very unusual experience.
A tourist area in New England, which is like where people don't really like talking to each other anyway.
It was good for me, but it did get very isolating. I was there for 2.5 years, and it was only supposed to be about 6 months. And I would go to the beach almost all the time. It was only a 15-minute walk from where I lived. And there was no one. There was literally no one every single day, day after day. And I was like, oh my goodness. Like, it was nice, but it was too weird. It was very surreal.
That sounds really eerie.
I started wondering, am I really here? Like, where am I? It was weird. So yeah,
I guess
you gotta have connection to something sometimes.
Yeah. My experience I would describe as feeling alone in a crowd. Like the only Venice Beach is it's always got something going on. And well, with the exception of any time it rains, which the best first date in LA is walking on Venice Beach in a slight drizzle, because you have the whole place to yourself. It's awesome. It is like walking around a theme park that's emptied out. But normally, it's an odd feeling, because people come here from all over the country and all over the world to be ostentatiously weird, to dress up in rabbit suits and ride around on trikes blasting deep house music, and just to do to be themselves. Because I met a lot of people. It can seem like that sort of like ostentatious freakiness is our version of conformity, but I assume a lot of those people came from places where they were discouraged from expressing themselves.
Right.
And because I that's how I felt. And when you get to an environment where you're almost forced to express yourself, it could be kind of a relief, but at the same time, it's a weird place to feel like an outsider, which I still do sometimes, which might be a little bit narcissistic. But if it's like 75 degrees and sunny almost every day, and you're surrounded by good-looking people in weird costumes, feeling depressed and misunderstood it almost feels like it's mocking you.
Right. Yeah, I can see that. Totally.
It's not letting you have that. It's gonna clown you for it. And maybe that's what I deserve. it can be helpful sometimes, but sometimes yeah, I really wish I was in like Belarus right now. I'd be more reflective of how I feel.
Wow. It sounds intense in a lot of ways, I guess, to be in
I've
that
kind of
environment and feel the way you do.
Yeah, I've lived in LA for a longer than I've lived anywhere else as an adult, and I've gone full circle on it over and over again. Like I've loved it, I've hated it, I've loved it again, I've hated it. Now it's just kind of where I live. Um, but I regret not traveling more, and when I do, it's I don't know what the next few years of my life are going to be like. It does feel like the kind of work I do theoretically can be done from anywhere.
That's good.
And I visited Atlanta over the summer, and I was really charmed. I went to school near there, and I thought, 20 years ago it was one thing, and now it's something else. Everything was very close together. It didn't take an hour to get from one place to another. People were. It didn't feel like everything was an audition. Uh, it it made me realize that I don't have to live here, which is kind of a relief.
Well, that's good. I actually went to Savannah College of Art and Design in Georgia
Okay.
in the 90s, and it definitely was different then, but it had that, there was something really comfortable for a long time being in the South like that. It's just a different, because I'm a Northeaster. I was
Yeah.
originally from New Jersey and around Manhattan all the time, and then to go to the South, it's just a different pace. I don't know that it's necessarily slower, like people say, but
Yeah.
there's something more casual about it, and yeah, it's just got in a way, a more welcoming feel, I think.
Yeah. I grew up there, so like the only way I appreciated nature was to move to Chicago because I was so spoiled. I grew up in the mountains. Like just Western North Carolina is a gorgeous part of the world,
It
and I
is, yeah.
didn't appreciate it at all because Nick Cave didn't play there. It's just like I have to go somewhere with some culture. I have to run away from home and go be homeless in the Bowery, and I'm 14 years old. Uh, but it's after living in Chicago for a couple of years, I came to really appreciate hills and flora and mountains and beaches and stuff like that. And one of the great challenges is just realizing how good we have it. Which
Right.
I wish I'd known how lucky I was to have that kind of environment where I grew up because I had no idea. I thought I was cursed.
I had the same thing. I grew up way out in the boonies at a small town close to the Pennsylvania border of New Jersey, Northwest.
Okay.
And although I did really like it a lot, but I felt completely out of place like you, and hated school and just felt like a freak all the time.
Yeah.
So I wanted to get out there and run away from home. And I went to Georgia, of all places. And that was interesting and good in some ways. And then, I bounced all over the place. I lived out in Seattle for a long time. I was in and out of New York for a couple of decades. And yeah, it gives you a new appreciation for all of the nature. But I feel like, at least for me, that I can kind of live in any environment now. Do you feel that way?
um, I've been hankering to try something else. I think what I'd like to do is wait until I don't necessarily expect to be called, but I would like to go somewhere where I'm going to somewhere rather than away from somewhere else.
Right. Yeah.
Uh, I don't, at this point in my life, it doesn't feel like a good idea to just keep bouncing around like a pinball because loneliness is a killer. and I can have trouble connecting with people. Just it's not the thing that I do best. It's something I have to work on doing consciously, and it takes some effort. But I'd like to go somewhere where there's a community and people who love me and want what I have to give, and it's I wouldn't say I feel that way about Los Angeles all the time. It would be
Right.
wishful thinking if I did.
Yeah, I can see that. It makes sense to me. That's how I felt about New York City. It's
Yeah,
just
New York City is great if you're young and rich, which I
right.
would like to be both of those things.
And while I was living there I left about 5 years ago, and I'm 50 now. So during that time, I was still struggling, still completely broke, and yeah, it's not pretty. It's not fun.
No, LA
It's
is a hard place to go
isolating.
down. Yeah, I think New York and LA don't love you very much when you're down and out.
No.
One thing I liked about Chicago is like I was a total bum in Chicago for like a couple of years, and at the time it's more expensive now, but at the time, the mass transit was pretty good. I At the time I was self-publishing zines
Mm.
and met a lot of like punks and anarchists and artists through doing that, who are have a some of them have kind of like support networks where you won't be doing cocaine on speedboats, but you can get your basic needs taken care of just by participating in these scenes. And I feel like Chicago is a great place to do that. I wouldn't try to do that here. I think you would go down hard.
Yeah, well, I can see it being very different. I mean, I've only been here for about a year and a half, and I don't go out much, like I said, and I don't really have any actual friends here. I have like one or two.
Uh,
But I
it
can
depends on
see it's
friend is a fluctuating
right.
term. I think I don't know what the current exchange rate is
Yeah,
for
yeah.
friendship.
So
One of my
it's
big
I can
fears is
see what you're
calling.
saying though. It seems like an easier having lived in a couple of major cities. I can see where this seems it's very spread out. There's something about the
Mhm.
lake here that does something with the energy, I think, that diffuses a lot of crazy frenetic energy. And
Interesting.
it's got its little pockets of neighborhoods, so I think it's easier to have the kind of lifestyle that you were talking about.
Yeah, I had a show on a pirate station in Rogers Park. I think
That's where I
it's
live.
also the that's where my brother lives.
Oh,
So
wow.
you're yeah, if you he has two kids, so I don't know if he has time for friendship. But
I
I'm
don't
sure
really
you
have
would be
time for
friends.
friendship.
They're, well, what's your excuse?
I'm always doing work and I'm going to be traveling soon, so I'm not going to be around much for a while. So maybe perhaps when I get back in the summer.
Well, if you're in Los Angeles and you need a kind ear, I will be your friend
Thank
for
you.
that
I
purpose.
appreciate it.
But yeah, what was it? Oh, I think another thing is so a lot of it is just the like not necessarily being part of a movement, because I'm not a joiner, right?
Not
I
either.
just pathologically not able to get into that. But uh, when I was in Chicago, when I was basically, when I was mostly out of work and trying to be Hunter Thompson, it was during the build up to and the protests around the Iraq War.
Hmm.
Um, the one 2003-04, like between when they were building up to that and when the Abu Ghraib stuff came out, which the protests around that were very stimulating for the underground. Like there was a lot of music and art, and people were doing shows, and not to say that the Iraq War was a good thing
Right.
or
Yeah.
that there was anything
Yeah.
good about it, but it was there was something good about being around and hanging out at a time when people felt galvanized in that way. I think it's harder to make that happen now, just because, and I don't entirely blame phones. I think just generally, there's, I get more of a sense of kind of helplessness from people now. Although not
Yeah.
always. I know with this stuff in with Israel Palestine, that's gotten a lot of people back outside,
Mm.
and I think it is part of it is the luck of the moment, like when these chains of causality come together in ways that no one could have anticipated, that create the opportunity to throw off some sparks. I think the trick is just being around when that happens.
Right place at the right time, I guess.
Yeah, something like that.
So you were starting to talk about your zines. Did you want to elaborate a little more on that?
Um, that was another thing where I was a big reader, and I was particularly a fan of like new journalism, and uh a lot of my favorite writing was in self-published zines. And so it's not, I got into it mostly because it was a way to just make something, and there was a handmade component to it, which is why I stuck with that way after blogs showed up.
Hmm.
uh, not just because I was betting on the wrong horse, but because I felt like there was a sacrament in making something by hand, and you could put it out there and have a finished product out there with your name on it that was exactly what you wanted it to be, and nobody could stop you. Uh, and so
I love
it's
that.
and it was also a great way to make friends, because when I was a teenager, I would exchange a lot of these things through the mail,
Hmm.
and I felt more. There were people that I knew as pen pals who knew stuff about me that no one I knew in person would ever know. And so when I got to Chicago, I think was the first time when there was a whole community of people doing this. And exchanging zines is a good way to get to know someone,
Right. Yeah.
because you get like the unvarnished version of that person, not their representative, but like you know something that, and it's not something you do if you don't have to. I mean, they're a pain in the ass to make. Almost everyone loses money.
Yeah.
uh the only reason to do it is if there's something you just have to put out there, and nobody's going to pay you to do it, and possibly no one is interested, but you feel compelled to put it out there. And I mean, you learn a lot about people when they share those things about themselves, that
Right. Yeah.
I've most of the stuff on that I say in writing or on the radio show, I probably wouldn't say on a first date, because I would be a little bit concerned about how I was coming off, whereas
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
less so in that container, because it's a more important that I say what I've got to say. That's the reason I'm there, and if I wasn't motivated by that, I would have no reason to do it. So some of my best friends I made through trading zines. Um, I write for a website called Recommend If You Like, that is run by a guy who I met doing zines in Chicago 20 years ago,
Well.
and we're still friends. And like my roommate for a long time, my best friend and roommate in Chicago was a zine publisher, and uh, that was a huge part of my life. I mean, I would say without that, every detail would be different.
I remember for me back in the 90s, pretty much for the whole decade of the 90s, zines were such a big thing. and comic books, like self-published comic books, independent stuff. And yeah, it was definitely easier to make friends that way and to do the trading by mail, and the pen pal thing struck me because that was such a wonderful thing. I had some pen pals when I was younger. One was in New Zealand and one in Canada, and yeah, it's kind of almost like a diary in a way to write, or a journal to somebody like that. It seems to be a little lost, but I noticed lately that there are people making zines again, so
it comes
I'm
and
hopeful.
goes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the things that, like, if there's any like all pervasive sweeping new trend, you can put money on there being a backlash to that. And I think AI is that right now. And I think the backlash is taking shape as stuff that is conspicuously made by hand. So, I think you're going to start seeing more hand illustration, handwriting. I think you said something interesting about pen pals that I think one of the most inspiring pieces of literary trivia that I've heard was Tom Wolfe when he was writing. I think it was the electric Kool-Aid acid test, but he couldn't figure out what his angle was going to be, like, and he puzzled over it, and wrote to his editor and just said, well, I'm lost, I don't know what to do. And the editor said, well, what's going on? Like, just tell me everything that's going on and maybe I can help you. So Wolf just wrote like a letter to his colleague about everything that was happening and sent it, and the editor just took the dear editor part off and published it. And
Wow.
and that was his big literary breakthrough, where, like, he had not figured out how to pitch it to a magazine, but he had figured out how to tell his friend about it. And that turned out to be like what everyone else wanted, because people want intimacy. I think they want that feeling.
It's kind of really genius what he did, because so people get so hung up on their own fears and all this stuff that they really hold back, and often end up going nowhere with things because they're just like being so precious about something. So it's pretty genius what he did, I think.
I also think if everyone likes you, no one loves you. Like, you have to.
I agree.
If you have to risk alienating people and actually alienate some people in order for, because if somebody wants you to like them too much, it's the problem with that is you don't really know anything else about them, because they could be making all of that up. You don't know how much of it is the presentation that's designed to trick you into liking them, and how much of it is really them. Right. But I think it comes from a fear that there's nothing there, which I certainly feel that way sometimes. But
I think we all do.
Yeah, but I think if you if you care just a little bit less about how you're perceived, and because no one could possibly care about that the way that you do, and just say stuff that you think is a little bit off in a way that's true to your experience, or what in your experience you don't see reflected very much, people know they can trust you. Even if they don't like you, they'll know that you have integrity. And I think most people feel safe. Right. Like, I would feel more safe around someone I disagreed with about everything if I felt like I knew who they were, than somebody that showed up and just mysteriously agreed with all of my completely misinformed opinions about everything. I want somebody who's wrong in ways that are in contrast to the ways that I'm wrong.
I think that's a good rule of thumb. So you were talking a bit the AI situation. I'd like to ask all the guests how they feel, or what they sort of predict the direction that we're going to go as creatives, like whatever kind of artist you are, do you feel like that we have a shot at remaining relevant in society, or what do you just go ahead? Sorry.
I think it's going to be a bloodbath in the short run. I think it's going to wreak havoc on a lot of the economic structures around art. And I think, in the same way that COVID did, I think it's going to expose a lot of the weaknesses in capitalism and a lot of the false promises of, like, especially this kind of like deranged hyper capitalism that we've embraced in this country that makes us the laughing stock of the world. But because it just crushes a lot of people's livelihoods, and there's no, we don't have a lot of built-in protections for that. And
Right.
I'm 45 years old. It's hard for me to learn an entirely new fucking trade, and it's made it harder for me to earn a living. And I think the honeymoon will be over for companies, but I don't think it's going back to the way it was. I think on a long enough timeline, my hope is that by becoming more human-like, like more Turing test capable, eventually the programs will show us what is uniquely human in a way that we didn't have access to before. I mean, I think it'll be interesting to see the stuff that they can do well, which I want to say information recall, but my experience with ChatGPT is you don't want to trust it. Like,
Right.
I do medical writing, and you're fucked if you take it if you take its word for something and publish it. But because it's just so full of bad information. It's good at kind of doing those low-hanging copywriting and graphic design type jobs that I don't know if those are coming back. I don't think they're coming back the way they were, but I think whatever shows up to like whatever the Dionysian side of that Apollonian phenomenon has the potential to show us something about what it means to be essentially human. Like I think the limitations of the robot and what it can and can't do. If it writes a play by Shakespeare, I think by putting that next to the genuine article, especially if they're similar in a lot of ways, will reveal what is exclusively of the human experience and what the machine can never do. And then I think that could be, I don't want to jinx it, but that might actually help us evolve and maybe make up for lost time. That's my hope anyway. I could go any number of ways, many of them utterly catastrophic. But I think we're starved for good news right now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, I like that. That's a pretty unique answer from a lot of the other guests. I mean, they've all kind of varied, but I like the optimism there, and I hope that we continue to have this sort of undercurrent of backlash, like you said, where artists and writers and all kinds of creative types are just doing it that much more to make a stamp and to go against the grain of the trajectory this AI beast is on.
Yeah, I wish I was more optimistic about like using protest tactics and like labor union tactics and old school stuff like that. I think
work.
That's
it goes nowhere. That kind of
that has never, well, it used to work, but that is a stat deck. You're gonna lose. The house always wins in those fights. I think I know how scary it is to be like, how the fuck am I going to make rent this month? And I wouldn't say like, I don't want to be Panglossian and say, well, if you just look at the longer trajectory, we can learn interesting things about ourselves. You should be glad that your career is destroyed and you don't have help. No, I understand just being angry. Yeah, I understand wanting to throw rocks at Starbucks, but I don't know. I wouldn't put money on that turning things around. I
Right.
think it's got to be something a little bit less predictable, maybe.
I agree. Yeah, we got to think outside of the box. Everything these days, I think, and
Yeah, I think the
just
adaptability is the only
yeah,
skill that matters. Everything else is like any sort of ingrained intellectual capital is going to hold you back if you assume that things are going to stay the same way.
yeah. I think that's a dangerous way to look at things. And it's never going to change. It's already changing. It's already light years ahead of what we even get to see. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's good to stay fluid and just embrace the change and try to see the areas where you can utilize the technology in your benefit.
And I think also just know that it's going to be hard and know that the only thing that really helps is relationships. And it took me like 40 some years to realize that. I always thought artistic achievement or critical acclaim or being rich or having lots of sex with hot people was what life was about. But uh, you know, I've discovered that the only way to survive the pain of getting older is to find those relationships. No, it's not always the people that you want to like. If you make a dream team of people that you want to be friends with, a lot of times that's not going to work. But if you just pay attention to people that you actually connect with, that you have
Right.
chemistry with, and start spending more time with those people, I think that's really the only hope.
I agree. So, do you have any kind of advice? I mean, you've just given a lot of good advice, but do you have any advice you could give to people maybe just starting out?
Just show up consistently. Don't feel like you have to wait. Making stuff and putting it out there is the best way to get better. And making crap and putting it out there is a really good way to get better. I've and it's gonna, the first bad review you get is gonna sting, and you're gonna want to quit. And I've quit over and over again. I'd say quit early, quit often, quit until you find something that makes you want to quit quitting. And so if you find some pursuit that you just can't, like, your life is so much more interesting when you're doing it than when you're not,
Mhm.
that's probably the thing you want to quit quitting. um Podcasting has a low barrier to entry. I find that it's less stressful and labor intensive for me than writing is. So it's kind of what I've been gravitating to more recently. It's really hard to get an audience. I think if you want to do a podcast and you want to get an audience, I would recommend a lot of the advice you usually get, which is defining it pretty well.
Mm.
Um, I hate the word niche, but that's,
Right.
if people say, like, if you have to be able to describe your show in 9 words, which I would say, Emerson Dameron's Medicated Minutes is, broadly speaking, a grim satire on self-help and postmodern spirituality in Los Angeles. I don't know if that quite covers it. I have a bunch of. I would say my advice would be just indulge yourself. Like, do everything you want to do and change it every time. See what works. I've had some of the things that have stuck on my show have been. I've started 3 new quasi-religious movements. I think the only one that's really gained a lot of interest is the First Church of the Satanic Buddha, which my hope.
Yes, tell us about that.
uh, it's a study in paradox. It's kind of, it's the equilibrium between, complete selflessness and complete indulgence. And I want to get one celebrity on board because I think that would solve all of my problems. Uh, I also, there's an advice columnist who I don't know if you remember on Twitter a few years ago, there was that joke about the person who's read one book. I think like a lot of people would quote Harry Potter or something, and a bunch of people would pile on and say, read another book.
Right. Yeah.
There's an advice columnist on the show called Ask a Satirist, whose one book is Philosophy in the Bedroom by Marquis de Sade. And all of his life advice is based strictly on that. There's also I used to write fiction. I didn't for a long time, and then I kind of inadvertently got back into it when I started writing and improvising fake erotic thrillers. So bite-sized erotic thrillers is another feature of the show. And that's all stuff that I just wanted to try. Like, it's not, I don't know that there's any audience for it. I've had, people have said that they liked it, and I always love to hear that. And people listen to the show. But it's basically just, I wanted to try this and see how it worked and see, what the idea would look like if I executed on it. So I just did that. And that's also good because you want to keep showing up.
Right.
I think the worst thing, and the other problem that people have with like waiting for that moment of inspiration, is the person that writes a novel and then just disappears for 20 years. Like you're not Dr. Dre or Thomas Pynchon. You can't do that. You have to show up like as much as you can and put stuff out there and be bold and ostentatious about it and put stuff out there that is not great, and just keep doing that. And one of the ways to do that is just to get comfortable with indulging weird ideas, because you don't know which, some of them aren't going to work and some of them are. And of the things that I would say I thought would be running gags on the radio show, it wasn't those. Those just happened to strike some kind of a nerve. So I'd say just be willing to throw a lot of stuff at the wall. Don't expect to have much of an audience for a couple of years. Use that luxury, because if nobody's paying attention, you can do whatever the fuck you want. If nobody's listening, you will not, there's no way you're going to get canceled. So
right.
just do what maybe later on.
Everyone's their own censor, really, if they're doing that. Like it's self-censorship, I guess. And
yeah, I'd say just do whatever it takes to not do that. Which brings us back to drugs, which I highly recommend to everyone. Do as many of them as you can.
All right. I love it. So let's see. I guess if you want to tell everyone where they can find you, and then I will put the links to everything in the blog and underneath the video on YouTube when this comes out.
Awesome. I am Emerson Dameron on all of the, I'm not on Twitter very much. I'm on Instagram sometimes. I'm on TikTok a fair amount. And YouTube is where I put out a lot of the videos, and the podcast is there, and it's just Emerson Dameron, one word. EMERSONDAMERON. It's French, so nobody knows how it's pronounced. Medicated-minutes.com is the site for the podcast, and it has all the links where you can subscribe on wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're in Los Angeles, occasionally I go out and do shows. I'm doing a show in Long Beach tonight, which will have already happened by the time you hear this. But there may be more. I always think maybe this is the show where I'm just going to say, fuck it, that's the last one. So it's possible that I'll never do this again. But if I do, usually I'll say something about it on Instagram. So follow me there.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure to have you on.
Yeah, this has been great.
Thank you. So
thank you.
We'll see you next time, everybody. Thanks.